I'll skip the introduction since I've met most of you either in the morning workshop or on this panel. How's the sound, by the way? I feel it's too loud. Okay. Let's see if this is working. Okay. Wonderful. So, to set the context a little bit, some of you were in the workshop this morning. The difference is going to be we will focus today's session here more on financial services use cases while we still look at the fundamental foundational powers of blockchain. The other aspect is what Chris mentioned. How do you look at this new shiny object everybody's talking about? How does that fit into the conversation with AI, RPA, and all these other technologies that we've been speaking of? Right? Does that make sense? So let's just roll through a few quick things. I have a lot of material, and I'll stop at occasional times just to get your feedback or your questions. I'm not here to really bore you or give you a death by PowerPoint. So feel free to ask your questions along the way. So imagine that you are in the 1800s. The steam engine has just been adopted, and railroads are now being mass adopted. It changed everything. It changed what we ate, where we lived, what we traded, what we exchanged with each other, how we met people. It changed the idea of war, and it changed the idea of peace. That is the juncture of human evolution that we stand at today in the evolution of blockchain and its related technologies. It is going to transform areas of your life, which you could think of. Let's jump into some financial services use cases that we see happening today. I've had multiple conversations on similar topics. The question is, well, what are companies doing? This sounds esoteric. This sounds like, oh, cool, it'll come in 100 years. Let's look up a couple of cases here. Visa has been putting up a B2B payments platform. R3 is one of those entrepreneurial companies, along with Ripple, that has established itself well in the space. If you look on the right, you'll see a lot of partners or adopters, and you'll see a lot of familiar faces. Some of these logos would actually be companies in this room already. I talked to a few. So the idea is you could use blockchain for a number of different things, and we'll explore what those things are. Companies have used it for payments, to improve efficiency within their processes, to reduce transaction costs, to keep an authentic, verifiable stream of record for the transactions. Here are a few more examples. The first one, I really like to talk about them, one of my favorite startup companies in this space. They're the first company to put bonds on the blockchain in the UK, and the interesting part is they did it with collaboration with the UK regulator called the FCA, and as a result, they have brought down the cost of putting a financial instrument, a security, introducing it from a cost of £40,000 to around £50. Ripple, one of the most well-known use cases, replacing the SWIFT network. So I was having a conversation with somebody today, and we talked about how Ripple can process 1,500 transactions per second now. This is their latest estimate, and they claim that they can have the same throughput as Visa. And their transaction time for bank-to-bank payments is 4 seconds. That's down from 4 to 5 days in the old network. So as you go through this presentation, think about ways in your companies that this new set of technologies can be adopted. Here's a couple of other ones, and I like the last one best. So that is the first decentralized crypto bank for e-residents. The idea of identity is changing. And the country of Estonia says, if you give me these documents, I will make you an e-resident, and this is a bank for them. The next level of evolution is to pull multi-asset blockchain-based wallets in your phone. You can even invest in stocks and peer-to-peer loans in real estate directly from the mobile app once it's all functional. So we'll come back to these use cases after we review what really is blockchain and get a foundational understanding of it. So just to ground ourselves, for me, blockchain is a cryptographically secure distributed ledger with shared state. What do I really mean by that? Let's take a quick example. If I was to send $20 to Chris, and Chris was to send $20 to Jacqueline, we have two transactions here. Roop to Chris, $20, Chris to Jacqueline, $20. In the old paradigm, we would have our own record of each of those transactions. And the question becomes, 10 years from now, whose record do I trust? And that's the centralized database version of transaction recording. Now comes blockchain. What if I said, we had the same transactions as we did, now let's put this transaction on a shared wall in front of us, where we all can look at the same transaction at the same time. It's published at that time, and there is no question on what the transactions were, who did it, and what time did it happen. We all agree that whatever we put up there is the set of transactions we all believe. That's the basic distinction between a database and a distributed ledger. So distributed ledger plus military grade encryption is equal to blockchain. Let's talk about encryption for a quick second. Now that we put our transaction up on the shared wall, maybe we don't want everybody to see it. We want everybody to know that it exists, but we don't want everybody to know or learn or understand its contents. That's when encryption comes into place. So when Satoshi Nakamoto, a pseudonym, came up with this idea of Bitcoin, which was essentially a peer-to-peer cash transaction mechanism, digital cash, I should say, it really is an implementation of military-grade encryption onto distributed computing. Now let's move ahead and talk about what are smart contracts. And I'm going to rush through it a little bit because there's a lot more material that I want to address in terms of use cases. Smart contracts are autonomous modules that encapsulate business logic which generate specific outcomes upon predefined triggers. Sounds like an academic, theoretical, blah, blah, blah. What does it really mean? So let's say we were to go take an example of Chris is going to a concert. It's in Miami. He bought a ticket. Concert ticket was about $500 worth, really expensive concert. And he just found out that he has to go on a business trip, as it happens, and he is not able to go to this concert 3 months from now. And he says, hey, Roop, would you buy this ticket for me? I say, okay, fair. You know, Chris, you're my friend. I'm happy to buy it. But here's the thing. There is a hurricane predicted in Florida during that time. Why? Because there is a hurricane in Florida at that time every year. There's a good 20% chance that the hurricane will happen, and we don't know if the concert will even happen. So how about I do buy the ticket from you at a certain, let's say, 12% discount. Do you like that, Chris? You say, fine, I'm not going anyways. Here's the ticket. We now just agreed to a set of business rules, a set of events that may happen, and a set of outcomes that might happen. And let's encapsulate that. The key word there is autonomously, meaning we don't need anybody's permission, not Chris's, not mine, to trigger that smart contract. Furthermore, it is triggered by the events happening. So now you say, well, we could do similar things today in current technology stack. We have things like business rule engines. We have things like macros and robots. Right? We could possibly do similar things. The answer is yes, you could. The further question to that is, who owns it? If you own it, do I trust it? So a constant theme that you hear me talk about is, what is the cost of trust? What is the nature of trust? For us as consumers in society, for consumers and businesses, for amongst businesses themselves. So, top 8 reasons where blockchain makes sense. When you're considering deploying it in your environments, what are the things you should look for? And we have quite a few people coming to us because blockchain is now a buzzword. Hey, can you make a business case out of it? No, maybe. Let's look at if these things apply. If they don't, the first question you should ask is, what can I do with current state today that I need blockchain for? Or the other way around, what I cannot do with current state that I need blockchain for. If I can do things today, I don't need to invest in all this. But maybe there are things that could be improved. Authenticity. which is made available by immutability, auditability, and provenance. What does that really mean? Going back to our previous example, we published the set of transactions between myself and Chris and Jacqueline, and we put them on the shared wall. Now we believe that these are immutable. They cannot be changed. They will not be changed. They cannot be changed. Nobody has the power to change them. That's another key distinction between databases that are owned by somebody versus a chain that is probably not owned by anybody. And I say probably because there are different models. You could have public blockchain or private blockchain. But the idea is the transaction up there, once published, on that timestamp, recorded, is immutable. I can stand firm on its existence and all the provenance that it brings with it. Decentralization. There are two ways to look at decentralization. One is, where is the data stored? We've been living in this model of central storage through databases and then putting together business processes along those databases to transact between partners. We're moving towards a model of decentralization, not storing in one place. What does that do? That gives us a multiple points of failure. In a centralized environment, you have one point of failure. If you're hacked or compromised, all of your data is gone. I'll give you 3 examples. Federal information hack of 3 years ago of medical records of federal employees, Equifax last year, and the most recent, Facebook. Maybe not a hack, but the question is, it was still in a central place that could be given away. The other point to think about, which is also obvious in these examples, is the degree of authority or the locus of authority. Who owns these nodes? In a public chain, nobody does. In a distributed environment, these nodes are sitting in multiple places. Even if one of them is compromised, the others still remain. The next power of blockchain is disintermediation. Essentially, if you look within your supply chains, we are moving to an era where entities who do not add value, who only exist to make sure that transactions are authenticated and verified and add trust to the entire end-to-end process, are likely to be disintermediated. And the question I will ask you guys is, maybe you have some of those companies. Maybe you will be in the path of that train. So the question is, can you be disintermediated? Blockchain allows us, easier than ever before, to establish proof of ownership. A really good example is to understand proof of title of land registry. If anybody here has been to or is from a developing country, you know that establishing the title for your land or your house is one of the most difficult things to do. It's rife with fraud and confusion, especially if it's an ancestral property. My father gave it to me, whose grandfather gave it, and whose grandfather gave it. The idea of a lineage and that record keeping is really challenging. And blockchain allows us to do that not only for land title, but for literally any kind of asset you could think of. You could establish proof of ownership for your driver's license, for your car, for this building. Can extend to the fish that you eat, or even the wine that you drink. So think about that. Where did this come from? What is the provenance? Who owned it along the way? What is the chain of custody? And where is it today? And it could be for any asset. That's the biggest evolution, if you will. It also allows us to establish a proof of authorship. If you've been in media industries, one of the common stories have been, whose idea was it? Whose song was it? Whose video was it? Whose picture is it? So let me ask you this. Today, we all use some kind of social network, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. You put pictures, videos, words on it. Do you get paid for it? How many of you made $1 out of it as a user? 0. Why? Because the business model for those companies is to get your data, our data, and then sell it to the sponsors. Blockchain revolution is shifting that. We can now monetize things that were not monetizable before. So check out Steemit. It's a blockchain-based sharing platform, similar to Facebook or Reddit or Medium, but the basic idea is you get paid for your content. And you will see the similar movement happen more and more. Artists will get credited for their work directly. Yes, please.
What was the name of that?
Steemit. Automation.
Sorry, is that really the concept of bringing that intellectual property rights into more of a common market?
Yeah, so the technology now is available to allow for that, right? So if you go back to the history of that, that kind of discussion, we started that discussion with Napster, right? Peer-to-peer exchange of songs. Well, who gets the credit for it, right? Where does the royalty go? And if you go back to the 70s, there were things or intermediary called record label that made a lot of money selling records, and the artist itself did not get much of credit for that. We are now moving into an era where if you put your content, your videos, your songs, your pictures onto the chain, you make sure that it's made, you have the proof of ownership there, and then we have platforms being developed now where whenever it is circulated, the content is circulated, you as the artist gets the credit for it. Does that make sense? Yeah. Automation. So somebody asked me, hey, you were in the business process improvement automation space. Why did you move into this blockchain space? My view is blockchain is a much better way of business process automation. The reason is, if you go back to our previous example, being very simplistic here, the current state of business processes are set up in centralized databases. We have set processes to transact between different partners, be it consumer or different partners, and we transfer data from one set of party to the other. What if we change that to a shared state that we all share together and we can trust it? There is transparency, that I know what transactions exist and I believe that they're truthful, that leads to trust. So to me, blockchain is really just a better way of business process automation, but at a much more strategic level. Trust in our automated world. So the revolution is that we will live in a world where there is not trust in a person, or in an institution, or in a company, but the trust is in the chain. Let's go back to before there was internet. We had physical goods, or we used to print information, and then we made copies of it, and we distributed amongst each other. Then came the internet, where it made possible to distribute content or data easily, and to reproduce that was a much cheaper effort. Transaction costs were lower, and the impact of that was seen as in industries like publishing, or even ask Blockbuster. We are now getting to an age of Internet of Agreements. If you understand what blockchain does, it's basically a series of agreements. We are then going to get into an era of where any physical object can be digitally codified into an asset, and that asset now, believed to be true, can be traded. So we will get to an internet of value. When I can trade my house directly on a platform that's built on blockchain. Or I can trade things that were not tradable before. That's the era we're going to live in. So shifting gears here, let's look at some of the investment the corporate world has been making into this space. And this data is from end of last year. So it's still a little bit dated, about 6 months dated, I would say. Since 2012, corporate participants have made 140 plus equity deals over $1.2 billion. These are the list of companies, and some of them may be in the room. This is not unknown to the financial services industry. Captains of the industry have been investing in this for the last 5-6 years. So where has the investment been made? The investment have been really made in developing a lot of blockchain-based platforms, and we'll cover that in a little bit more detail in a few slides. If you look at the nature of investment and the kind of investors that have been getting into this space, you'll see that they've been improving. A lot of people wonder, what is the institutional response? And I think 2017 was a marquee year for that. So moving on, just further underscores the point. A lot of times in these conferences, I feel like the conversation is very operational. There are other areas where investments are being made at a strategic level.
So this slide, the last slide, talked about interest, enthusiasm, let's say, going into the topic.
Yep.
Where is the actual adoption curve in your mind?
Yeah.
Real material impact in businesses, the applications.
Right. So let's look at, I'm going to jump ahead to answer your question. Let's go here. Yes. We talked about Ripple. Simple platform, bank-to-bank payments, exchanging the SWIFT network. They have today 100+ customers, and their customers are banks, financial institutions. Over 75 of them have deployed it commercially, meaning they have end users on it. And to me, that is a big indicator of adoption. That's just one example. You can look at, cases like Navarro and putting bonds on the chain as an innovative thing to do. But if you really think about it, now they're helping other banks put securities on the chain. So it's introducing a new class of assets. If you look at the Visa experiment, they piloted last year. They plan to launch it middle of this year. So to summarize, I think we are at a growth stage. A lot of experimentation is being done. People are tinkering and figuring out which part of these technologies actually work. Because from a technical maturity standpoint, we're not there yet. These technologies are still in their diapers. So to even achieve rates like what Ripple is talking about, 1,500 transactions per second, is amazing in the time frame that we have been developing this. So this is another one of those examples where investments are being made. Okay, so moving on. There are a lot of banks in the room. I think a macro trend that we all recognize is that there is unbundling of a bank. The statement I heard somewhere, banking will remain, but banks may not. All the possible services that a bank would provide, there's so many other companies that are providing that now. So in the context of this conference, we just had that conversation over the other table, there is a conversation to be had about how do we improve processes and how do we improve what we do in current state today, versus a different conversation to be had about what is the future state. You can talk about improvement now, or the other conversation is, will my company exist in 5 years?
Do we envision that this kind of a plethora of services would not be regulated as banks are today?
Absolutely not. So we'll talk about regulation in a second. So regulation can kill or excite innovation. In my opinion, regulation always lags 2 phases behind innovation. And it is happening now. I think last year and this year is the time that you've seen a lot of regulation coming into this space. So there, I'll give you positive examples of it. 2. In the United States, just about 2 weeks ago, state of Wyoming passed 4 laws, which now made a new class of assets called utility tokens legal. They are not property, they are not commodity, they are not a security. They are a new class of asset called utility token, which this emerging world of crypto companies have been calling for a while. So that's an excellent example of a regulator understanding the value of it. FCA is another example, a UK company I talked about. So regulator was a big part of that experiment to put bonds on the chain. They had to approve that now, having put this up, this bond is a legal instrument and a financial instrument. And somebody could go to court if the terms are not agreed upon, or the smart contracts don't adjudicate the way they're supposed to. Right? There's plenty of regulation that's happening, and I think more of it will happen. The question is, on a global scale. So I wrote an article on this. The title was, "One country's ban is another country's boom." Different countries and states will, on a spectrum of being conservative to liberal, they will take different stances, and that will determine where economic development happens. So there are a few VCs that I talked to who actually believe and claim that this blockchain revolution will bring economically distressed regions out of that distress, because it will allow for movement of new companies and new technologies there. So one of the fundamental questions we deal with, what is the challenge for bigger companies to innovate? And this is something that you all possibly deal with in your environments. So I'll just leave this as a question. We can talk about how to improve things now, the current state, or we can talk about how to make the current state obsolete. Is blockchain more than merely yet another technology? My view is it's way more than that. So let me come back to this one. I want to talk about this slide right here. So from a tactical level, on the left end, you can replace all legacy technology stack and reduce your technical debt, even just implementing it within your organization's institutional bounds, not going outside of it. This goes to business process automation, data transparency, reduction of a lot of manual effort. Or on the most strategic side, it's redrawing verticals and enabling new business models. So one of the fundamental challenges in understanding this space is, well, what do we do with it? It depends. You want to be on this end or that end. It depends on what's your appetite. Here's another way to look at it. You can protect and authenticate transactions, protect intellectual property, monitor and verify assets chain of custody, or transfer digital or physical assets. So now let's expand the discussion beyond just financial services for a second, just to open our lens up. Think about medicines in healthcare, or public health more specifically. Think about the global movement of medicines. If there was a chain that could help me track that, this world would look a very different place. Now let's also think about, there's about, what's the estimate World Bank gives? About 4 billion people that are either unbanked or underbanked. There are a lot of companies in this space that are trying to use the blockchain technologies to bring banking services to those underbanked or unbanked. So coming back to financial services and reviewing the use cases again. So to your question, Chris, if you look at R3, they very recently, Credit Suisse and ING, swapped baskets of securities. That's just in March. So I think that's the stage of development we are at. It is not completely adopted yet. I would still say that we are in nascency of the technical maturity of it. And in terms of experimentation, if you look globally, the results are such that a lot of incumbents are now excited about it. Let's get a couple of other use cases here. Let's talk about, well, we covered these two pretty well. Let's talk about this one. Israel's largest bank. So it's actually a very simple use case that they're doing. They just want to be able to get customers to submit documents and verify them on a chain. That's their step number one. Something that we all can relate to in financial services. If you could just improve that part of the process, imagine the scale of improvement there. They launched in 2017, and somebody was here from Microsoft this morning. So Azure is their partner. And by the way, just a disclaimer, we as a company and me personally, we're very product agnostic. So when we start talking about technology platforms in this space, you have the public chains and the private platforms. So talk about Hyperledger or Corda or R3 or Ripple. To me, the question really is, if I'm talking to you, what is your business use case? And then which technology is the most suitable for it? It really doesn't matter to me which technology platform you use. At some level, they're all at a nascent stage of maturity, frankly. Blockchain alone is not enough. It has some powers. It won't do everything. It doesn't have the powers of God. So a decentralized blockchain platform at an infrastructure layer will interact with IoT, with smart contracts, with artificial intelligence, with RPA, machine learning, business intelligence, and that's what is the technology stack of the future. So I would look at blockchain as solving some specific challenges, and you have to find what those are and how does it fit with your overall technology stack. It's not all rainbows and sunshine. We touched on this a little bit. Scalability is an issue that's talked about a lot in the media. For me personally, it's not an issue because there are two things to think about. One, what is your use case? Does it require scalability? Unless you're developing a use case for high volume transactions, there's no real reason for that level of scalability. If you're just authenticating my driver's license, how many transactions per second do you really need? Number two, if you talk about blockchains, there may be issue of scalability on one particular public blockchain. But in most of your contexts, developing it in an institutional setting, you are more likely to develop a private permission-based blockchain amongst your supply chain partners. You define what the consensus mechanism is, and you define what the requirements of scalability are. So it's not much of a concern to me, frankly. Technology maturity is. The other big concern is security. As soon as you say, I'm cryptographically secure, nobody can hack me, there's 10 people lined up to hack you. And that is an ongoing concern no matter what. That's the kind of world we live in anyways. So blockchain is, in fact, one of the better solutions for it, since it's been designed to be resistant. Now, even within that, let's talk about protocols in this space. There are some protocols that are more secure than others. And security in itself is a design trade-off in a lot of these protocols. You can choose security versus you could choose scalability. And companies are not trying to develop a very good medium of the two where there is a balance of security and scalability. The last part I want to mention here is mainstream adoption. It's nice to talk about these things. A technology sitting in a lab is not worth anything. It may be a superior technology, but doesn't count for much. Adopted technology is worth something. So what I want you to think about is, what is the consumer level shift in behavior that we are going to experience in the next 10 to 15 years? And then how does the evolution of these technologies align with that consumer shift? That's where adoption will take place. So to your point, I do wonder sometimes, where are the real users? If you go to Steemit, there are real users today. If you go to Ethereum, there may not be some real users. There are people who are playing with it, depending on what you're looking at. Depends on the use case. If you look at financial services, there's definitely real users on the payment side of things. As John asked me, what's the first step here? I think payments was the beachhead, and then it's evolving. And I think the real value people are seeing is in two things. One is development of blockchain-based platforms. A lot of consulting firms are into that space. A lot of financial services companies are into that space. We will see an evolution of consensus mechanism overtaking existing intermediaries who touch the transaction and extract a toll in the process. If I can develop a platform that can authenticate data and keep it immutable and trustworthy, and I can decide on who gets to see it, that platform will disintermediate a lot of the intermediaries that we have in current supply chains, from issuance of assets to settlements. So let me stop here before wrapping up and take a few questions. Feels like I've bored you enough.
What horizon do you think we're talking about for middle adoption, where it's really here, it may not be 100%, who knows if in this market it may never be 100% because it's going to start rolling.
That's right.
But when would you say it's here and people would recognize it as being here?
Yeah. So I'll give you three thoughts here. One is, if anybody's heard of Amara's law, we always underestimate adoption via technology. We overestimate in the short term, we underestimate in the long term. So I do believe that. Two, let's talk about what do we mean specifically in terms of adoption. If you talk about payments, here's a prediction. I believe 50% of world's payments, retail plus trade payments, will be on some crypto-based asset in the next 10 years. So let me repeat that. 50% of world's transactions, retail and trade, will be on some form of crypto-based assets within 10 years. Too strong? Okay. So we did a...
Centralized currency worldwide, basically.
Huh?
One centralized currency.
No.
No.
No, I did not. No, so that's an interesting question. So because we are now seeing the rise of cryptocurrencies, which I call crypto assets, there is a choice on the side of central banks to develop national cryptocurrencies. So crypto-based ruble or crypto-based dollar or crypto-based yen. And central banks are in the process of doing so. IMF has clearly indicated that this has value. And from my point of view, fiat currency is dead. What does that mean? As a technology, the fiat currency and we call it fiat, the paper-based fiat currency that we are all used to today is just an old technology. It's not secure. So we are moving to a better form of technology in the same way that we probably moved from gold coins and silver coins to a paper-based system, 500 years ago maybe, or even before that. So fiat currency is dead. Some form of cryptocurrency will be the medium of transaction. Now the question is which one? That's anybody's guess. I have these debates often where there are people who want to find one single winner. Oh, Bitcoin will be the winner, or this will be the winner. I don't believe in that. I believe that there will be de facto choices in particular use cases, meaning I may use some currency for media transaction and a different currency to buy my coffee.
So FX will evolve.
Exactly. Yeah.
Monetary policy.
Yeah, monetary policy will move on. But central banks have a choice to make. How do they respond? I mean, this is a clear threat or opportunity, depending on your perspective, on national government currencies.
But Bitcoin is not issuing new, like the U.S. government is not, right?
Yeah, so U.S. government, and my guess is U.S. government will come out with a crypto-based dollar. So then the game even becomes more interesting. If today what's happening is, when you hear about people launching coins, and this is a lot of detailed discussion to be had here, but when you think about people launching their own currencies, what's really happening? They're becoming the central banker of their own currency. I minted, I don't know, 100,000 of these, and I gave you 20, I gave him 50, now I'm the central banker. Do they think they have the maturity to be that? So it's a different game now. In a world of multiple currencies, which one wins? I don't believe that there will be one winner. I believe that there will be de facto choices, leaders in one use case or the other. Maybe there'll be one for trade credits or trade payment settlements. Maybe there'll be another for purchasing my movie tickets. So back to your question, in terms of adoption, I think the time frame is within the next 5 to 8 years that we can say that this, and now let's qualify what this is, blockchain-based platform, blockchain-based way of doing business, blockchain as a part of your technology stack, and blockchain as a new form of internet in my consumer life. 5 to 8 years. Does that make sense? Yeah.
What's the way to think about in your mind the distinction between blockchain applications and blockchain builders? Meaning, is there any barrier to entry from a company establishing an application in space that they can quickly own because it's the de facto method, as opposed to an entrenched provider who's got a technology or security environment, whatever it might be, that others know?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. So if you look at the space, IBM, Oracle, SAP, there was a gentleman here from SAP, everybody who has been a de facto platform in the ERP world is now getting into the space. There are new emerging players like Ripple, R3, Hyperledger, which is IBM really, or Linux Foundation, and a few others, Quora. So is there a barrier to entry? I think the barrier to entry is pretty low. The real barrier to entry is what we discussed in the panel. There's lack of talented resources. So there is so much demand that the barrier is really how quickly can you put capacity up, right? So that's why you see a lot of these emerging companies who have been able to do that quickly. Now, if you want to flip the question, what is the barrier for an established player to get into this space? I do have an opinion on that. I think for a company like SAP or Oracle, the challenge is that they're incumbents. They live in the current state. So the challenge is not skill set from their point of view. They may have the resources to stand up capacity. The challenge is their mindset. Can they quickly evolve to this new way of living where there is the institutional trust is waning off, the trust is increasingly going to be in the chain, where consumers will demand that, and where you'll have new entrants coming in the market very rapidly, challenging your de facto position. Does that make sense? So, what is your choice? Are you a spectator or a player? My recommendation is quit being a mere spectator or a mere amused spectators and jump on the field, find out plays that work. And some of you are already. Find out how this is revolutionizing the world you live in as a consumer. Think about things that you can make more efficient. And then furthermore, employ that in your corporate world and see how you can push those boundaries of innovation. And when you do, you will not only improve business processes, not only engage customer in a deeper way, not only incite innovation, but you will write the next chapter of evolution of your company. Thank you.